In this section, I want to go ahead and talk about pivot tables, and while the name sounds fancy, I'm going to help to simplify this for you. The first thing that I want to talk about here is what is a pivot table? Well, part of that definition is in the name, so it's a pivot table and it allows you to pivot or change some of the data in a really easy way that allows you to update what you're seeing inside of an Excel sheet. Now you might be asking, how the heck could this be useful? Well, when you're working with lots of different data and you want to summarize it into calculating the sum, or maybe do some mathematical operations such as getting the average of something, you don't necessarily always want to write out all of those calculations on your own. Instead, what you can do is you can do some drag and drop functionality inside of Excel to dynamically calculate the values for different rows and different columns of data, and let's go ahead and show you how that works. To get us started, I'm going to go ahead and delete that chart that we previously created, and then I'm going to go ahead and ungroup some of these columns so we have more data to look at. The next thing that I want to do is highlight all these columns of data here that we want to put into a pivot table, and then I want to go up to the Excel menu, I'll click on Insert, and then I'm going to click on the pivot table icon. After doing that, we see that this new menu popped up, and this is asking us for where's the location of where you want to put the pivot table. And you can either put it on the existing sheet if you tell it what cell you want it to be located in, or you can have it put the pivot table on a brand new sheet. In our case, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to click this button to have Excel put the pivot table on a brand new sheet, and I'll say OK, and there we go. Next, as part of our best practices, let's go ahead and rename this sheet so we know that it's actually the pivot table and not something else. Now that that's out of the way, let's go ahead and get familiar with some of the operations of a pivot table. On the right-hand side here, what we're looking at is the pivot table field menu or field list. Now, one important call out here is that if you ever happen to close it by clicking on this X here, you can easily get that pivot table list back by going through these following steps. First, we'll go up to the Excel menu. Then we'll click on this pivot table analyze, and then we'll go ahead and we'll select the field list. Okay, now that we have the list back up, let's go ahead and talk about some of these sections. First, we have all of the field names being displayed here, and these are going to be all of the column headers that we had on row number 1 inside of our original data set. Now, the way that we're going to go ahead and work with the pivot table is we can grab or we can click on one of these field names here, and we can drag it to the different sections that you see on this pivot table list. For example, for category groups, if we wanted to filter the data in category groups, we can just grab that item and take it over to the filter section. When we look over at our Excel sheet on the left-hand side here, we can see that there was changes to Excel, and now we have this filter for the category option. While this is helpful if you wanted to select a filter, it's not doing us a whole lot of good because we're not displaying any sorts of rows or columns of data that we want to output and display from an analysis standpoint. So to make this more valuable, let's say that we wanted to analyze our data based on the category group. More specifically, what we're looking for here is we want to create a new table that is basically this summary table that's going to have all of the categories in rows, and then what we want is this item total at the top for one of the columns. To do that, all we have to do is go over to our field selector list, grab this category item, bring this down to the rows section, and then we'll go to that total, and then we'll bring that down to the values section. Now, when we drag those totals into the values section, Excel by default decided to sum up that information, and that's exactly what we wanted. Now, this looks pretty good, but if you're paying close attention, when we grab that category group and we moved it down to rows, we can see that it's no longer in the filter section here. Now, even though that's a little misleading, what we can do is we can click on this drop-down menu here, and we still have the option to filter our data if we wanted to. To go ahead and show you an example of how this filter works, I'm going to go ahead and uncheck everything, and then I'm going to go back and check household, so that's the only item that's being displayed. Now that's pretty helpful, but what if we wanted to display some more granularity to that household data? For example, we have the totals by the category, but what if we wanted to have them also by the category group? To do that, all we have to do is go over to our field selection list here. We'll grab that category, we'll drag it down to another row, and we'll put it below the category group item there, and that's all that there is to it. This seems like it might be really helpful. However, when we look at the left-hand side and we look at our data, it looks like we might have way too many categories, so we should just probably go back to using the category group instead of all this granularity. To fix that issue, it's really simple. We'll just go back to our field list over here. We'll click on that category name, and we'll just drag it off of the field selector. The next thing that we'll do is we'll get us back to sort of the beginning state by clicking on this filter and selecting all of our items. Now that's pretty cool, but what if we wanted to do some additional things like looking at the average dollar amount spent per transaction for a given year? So the first thing that we want to do here is we want to change from displaying the sum to displaying the average, and that's really easy to do by clicking on this little I button right over here in the field selector list. This opens up a new window, and inside this window we can go ahead and search for and select average, and then we can say OK. That looks good, but given that this is our first time working with a pivot table, we might want to do a little bit of a quality assurance check, and so we can just go back and look at our original data to make sure that the pivot table is doing what we expect. To do this, I'm going to go ahead and select some random data, so I'm going to pick a category group for construction, and then for the year I'm going to pick 2009. When I look at the data that we have here and check the average, we get 19.537. If we go back to our transactions data, we can turn on our filters like we did in the past, and we're going to go ahead and select the exact same data, grabbing that construction data and looking at the 2009 year. The next thing that we want to do is highlight these three records right here for the totals, and then we'll go to the bottom of Excel and we can see that this says 19.54 because it's rounded, and if yours doesn't show that, go ahead and right click and change from sum to change from average. So the bottom line when we look at this is, when we look at this average here in Excel, we're getting the exact same value as what the pivot table shows, so everything checks out. Let's do a little bit more work in our pivot table, and we can start off by resetting some of those filters. We'll go ahead and grab this order date and we'll drag it off of the field list here, and then we're going to drag order date over to the rows to have it displayed there. Next, I'll go ahead and grab that category group, drag that over to the column section, and then what I want to do is change the values to be a sum value being displayed. Now when you look at the table, you can see that you have the years here, and you can expand that down to the quarters and the months. If you wanted to modify this even further, it's super easy, and you can actually drag that category group and you can move it down underneath the years, and that's going to change how the data is being presented to you over here on the left-hand side. If you want, you can even grab this category group and you can drag it to the top of the section here to also change your view. And to make this data even easier to read, we can go over here and we can right click on the category group, and then we can just collapse the entire field. This makes it a lot easier for us to see the data on the sheet, and if we wanted to look at anything more specific, all we have to do is drill down into the data. So that's it about the basics of a pivot table, and I hope that you found it to be really valuable and really easy to use. I'm hoping that you really see the value to be able to quickly and easily modify the way data is being displayed versus working from that data tab that we originally had and clicking through different filters that were in your header row. Now that we're finished up with the basics of pivot tables, I'm going to go over to the next section where we're going to talk a little bit more about some charts.